Open fire!
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ali Sprotus channel. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today, we're going to be discussing the movie The Mask from 1994. Stanley Ipkiss, a sweet but hopelessly unlucky bank clerk in the bustling city, lives a life perpetually tinged with the frustration of being overlooked, much like a lesser-known supporting actor waiting for his big break. His existence is a monochrome backdrop against the vibrant world he desperately wishes to inhabit. He harbors a massive, almost boyish crush on the stunning jazz singer, Tina Carlisle, whose sultry performances light up the notorious Coco Bongo Club, a siren call for anyone with a pulse, yet entirely out of Stanley's reach. One rainy evening, while cleaning out debris from a riverbank, a mundane task reflecting his unremarkable life, Stanley stumbles upon an ancient, jade-green mask carved with menacing features. Driven by a curiosity perhaps mirroring that of an eager young actor discovering a unique prop, he cleans it and, almost ritually, places it upon his face. The transformation is immediate and explosive. Out steps the mask, a chaotic, hyperkinetic whirlwind of mischievous energy. This character is pure id, possessing cartoon physics and an unshakable confidence that Stanley could never muster. The mask channels the anarchic spirit often celebrated in early 20th century vaudeville and silent film comedy, a character unbound by reality. Suddenly, Stanley isn't just holding a lottery ticket, he's the entire lottery. The mask uses his newfound abilities, shape-shifting, unbelievable strength, and a knack for delivering snappy one-liners reminiscent of a seasoned stand-up comic, to wreak havoc and, more importantly, to woo Tina. He crashes the Coco Bongo, becoming the club's star attraction, dazzling Tina with feats that defy Newtonian physics, all while dodging the persistent, if clumsy, efforts of Detective Mitch Kellaway, who is convinced this green-faced menace is behind a string of bizarre incidents, including the robbery of Stanley's own bank. Kellaway's dogged pursuit feels like the earnest but ultimately futile chase of a hard-working beat cop against an impossible supernatural star. Meanwhile, the true villain of the piece, The ruthless club owner Dorian Tyrell, a man whose ambition far outstrips his actual talent, notices the magic emanating from the mask. Dorian, ever the opportunist seeking any edge for stardom or illicit gain, spies the mask as the ultimate tool. He's essentially a failed producer looking to steal a brilliant script. The central conflict intensifies as Stanley tries desperately to manage his double life. He's navigating the precarious tightrope walk between the meek employee and the outrageous alter ego, all while falling deeper for Tina, who is drawn to the mask's dazzling persona, yet surprisingly intrigued by Stanley's inherent kindness when the green visage fades. The inevitable collision occurs. Dorian manages to steal the mask, donning it himself. However, Dorian's greed and dark nature warp the power. His mask is a brutal, snarling parody of Stanley's joyful chaos, reflecting the notion that true artistry comes from the heart, not just raw desire for power. This villainous mask lacks the inherent comedic timing and genuine playfulness that made Stanley's version so magnetic. The climax unfolds back at the Coco Bongo, which Dorian has repurposed for a sinister scheme. Stanley, stripped of his magic and relying only on his own wits, the true test for any performer, must confront the monstrous Dorian mask. He ultimately uses his knowledge of the mask's magical rules, finally retrieving the artifact just as the police swarm in, leading to Dorian's downfall. As the sun rises, the mask is returned to the river, a piece of raw, chaotic potential put back into nature's keeping. Stanley, no longer needing the green adrenaline shot, has internalized some of the confidence. He approaches Tina, not as a cartoon hero, but as himself, finally recognized for the good man he is. The final shot suggests that while the magic is gone, the self-assurance born from the experience remains, a subtle but essential character arc achieved. Stanley Ipkiss's dreary existence as a bank clerk was a study in beige monotony, a life lived perpetually in the shadow of what could be. He possessed the quiet desperation of an actor relegated to understudying roles he was clearly born to play, forever tripping over his own feet in the presence of the dazzling Tina Carlisle. Tina, with her voice like melted caramel and a stage presence that commanded instant devotion, a natural star whose career trajectory seemed predestined for the biggest marquees, represented everything Stanley felt excluded from. His yearning for her was palpable, a silent film monologue playing out behind his wide, anxious eyes. The discovery of the jade artifact felt less like chance and more like fate intervening, like an archaeologist unearthing a legendary script. When Stanley finally slipped the mask on, the metamorphosis was less a costume change and more a spontaneous combustion of personality. The mask that emerged was pure, unrestrained showmanship, a throwback to the golden age of rubber-faced comedians and vaudeville tricksters, someone utterly comfortable in the spotlight that Stanley always fled. He moved with the liquid exaggeration of a seasoned silent film star, capable of pulling improbable objects from thin air, a brass band, a giant mallet, all delivered with impeccable comedic timing that no amount of drama school tuition could teach a mortal man. His initial forays were dedicated entirely to impressing Tina. Crashing the Coco Bongo as the mask was the equivalent of a struggling musician suddenly dropping a #1 hit single that redefined the genre. He didn't just sing, he put on a revue, showering Tina with impossible affection and mesmerizing her with impossible feats of agility and magic. Detective Kellaway, meanwhile, pursued the mask with the determined, slightly hapless energy of a small-town sheriff trying to arrest a cosmic force. Kellaway's frustration was the honest laborer confronting a phantom who played by entirely different rules. Dorian Tyrell, the predatory owner of the Coco Bongo, observed this magical phenomenon with the avarice of a producer who sees a runaway success but doesn't understand the artistry behind it. Dorian was all sharp edges and hollow ambition, a man who desperately wanted the limelight but lacked the innate spark, the essential charisma, to sustain it. He saw the mask not as a source of joy or mischief, but as a tool for ultimate, effortless domination. Stanley's attempts to maintain the facade were inherently heartbreaking. He genuinely loved Tina, a love rooted in mutual kindness and quiet understanding, which contrasted sharply with the explosive, ephemeral adoration the mask garnered. Tina was genuinely captivated by the wild abandon of the green creation, yet she found herself drawn to the glimpses of the hesitant, genuine man underneath, sensing a depth the carefree caricature couldn't offer. This internal tug-of-war defined Stanley's every waking moment, the fear that the real him was too dull, too insufficient. The pivotal moment arrived when Dorian, employing ruthless cunning, worthy of a silent film villain, managed to procure the mask. When Dorian wore it, the result was horrific. His transformation was grotesque, his magic purely selfish and destructive. This iteration of the mask was brute force without wit, reflecting the belief that power without a moral core or a sense of fun curdles instantly into monstrosity. Where Stanley's mask pulled endless bouquets, Dorian seemed eager to pull out knives. The final confrontation was Stanley's ultimate test. Stripped of the magical crutch, he had to rely on the bravery he had been practicing in spirit while wearing the green face. It was a performance where the stakes were absolute, requiring him to outsmart a magical entity using only his newfound hard-won confidence and intelligence, the traits he cultivated while playing the role of the hero. When the police finally overwhelmed Dorian, the chaos subsided, and the Jade artifact, the ultimate catalyst for change, was ceremoniously returned to the murky depths of the river, its energy neutralized. Stanley, stepping forward, finally owned the space he inhabited, approaching Tina not as a spectacle, but as a man who had wrestled with his own limitations and, through extraordinary circumstances, found the courage to be authentically present. The lingering sense of possibility, the quiet self-assurance that replaced the crippling anxiety, was the true, enduring takeaway from the brief, wild tenure of the Green Marvel. Stanley's transformation, when he finally shed the crippling self-doubt that had been his constant companion, was less about gaining power and more about liberating an essence already trapped within. The mask didn't just give him confidence, it gave him the vocabulary to express the vibrant, imaginative inner life he usually kept locked away for fear of ridicule. It was as if a life spent watching classic cartoons and absorbing the frantic energy of slapstick comedy suddenly had an outlet. He became the embodiment of the anarchic id, the unfiltered id that cinema has always used to provoke laughter and challenge social norms, echoing the wild, boundary-pushing performances of early cinematic clowns. Tina Carlyle, the object of his agonizing affection, was drawn to the sheer theatricality of the mask. She was a professional entertainer, accustomed to artifice, yet the mask's performance was so genuine in its artificiality that it was undeniably captivating. She saw in his electrifying escapades a freedom that even her glamorous life as a singer at the Coco Bongo couldn't offer. Her fame was structured, his was pure, untamed improvisation. Yet, beneath the green veneer, she sensed a flicker of familiarity, a nascent sweetness that intrigued her more than the over-the-top theatrics. Her attraction to Stanley was subtle, a recognition of shared vulnerability hidden behind professional facades, hers of glamour, his of timidity. Detective Kellaway's frustration was the everyday man's existential dread made manifest. How do you book a suspect who can turn into a saxophone or a giant mallet? Kellaway represented the rigid structure of law and order, being confronted by pure, joyful lawlessness. His pursuit was dogged, fueled by the need to restore normalcy, a need that mirrored the audience's desire to see order imposed upon the delightful chaos unleashed by the green spirit. His interactions often felt like a live-action cartoon chase, with Kellaway constantly being outmaneuvered by sheer absurdity. Dorian Tyrell, in stark contrast to Stanley's eventual use of the mask, approached the artifact with a purely transactional mindset. He saw the power as a shortcut to the status he felt entitled to, a shortcut to the stardom that had always eluded him. This mirrors the cautionary tale often found in Hollywood lore. Talent is often less rewarded than ruthless opportunism. When Dorian dons the mask, his performance is devoid of humor or spontaneous creativity. It is heavy, menacing, and characterized by a lack of rhythm. His green face is not a source of joy, but a vessel for unbridled, ugly desire, making his version a terrifying distortion of Stanley's vibrant energy. He personifies the idea that mimicry without understanding is corruption. The emotional core of the story rests on Stanley's desperate desire to be worthy of Tina without the mask. He spends his time rehearsing confidence, trying to channel the mask's bravado into his own hesitant gestures. The juxtaposition is painful. The exhilarating heights of being the star of the Coco Bongo versus the crushing anonymity of his 9-to-5 life. The mask forces him into the light, and once exposed, he finds that the character he created has taught him the necessary script for his own life. The final battle is Stanley's true debut. It is the moment the understudy finally steps onto the main stage without the lead actor's costume. He succeeds not by becoming the mask again, but by using the structural knowledge gained from his alter ego, the quick thinking, the ability to disrupt expectations, but grounding it in his own genuine commitment to protecting Tina and stopping Dorian. When the mask is finally submerged, it's a symbolic washing away of the magical quick fix, leaving behind the durable change. A man who has faced his deepest fears and found that his own unadorned self possesses unexpected reserves of bravery and wit. Tina's final acceptance of Stanley feels earned, a reward for seeing beyond the green paint to the good heart beneath. The aftermath of the confrontation left a tangible residue of exhilaration, mixed with a profound sense of exhaustion clinging to Stanley. The whirlwind romance, fueled entirely by supernatural hyperactivity, had to settle into the quieter, more complex rhythms of genuine connection. Tina, having witnessed the extreme polarities of Stanley's life, the meek bank clerk and the green manic showman, now had to reconcile these two realities. Her affection, which had begun as fascination with the impossible spectacle, now had to pivot toward appreciating the imperfect, vulnerable man who owned up to the chaos. This transition mirrors the difficult shift in an artist's career when a wildly successful, genre-defining debut must be followed by a more mature, sustainable body of work. Stanley's challenge was navigating the post-magic come-down. The world no longer snapped to his tune. The everyday noises, the traffic, the demanding boss returned with a dull thud. But they seemed less oppressive now. The lessons learned while channeling cartoon physics translated into a subtle but significant improvement in his demeanor. He carried himself differently, his gaze meeting others without immediately darting away. This internalized confidence was far more potent than any superficial power the mask offered, representing the true, lasting transformation sought by those who undergo radical, unexpected change. He had stared down a monstrous version of his own suppressed desire and emerged not needing the illusion. The Coco Bongo, having hosted supernatural mayhem and police raids, needed a serious recalibration. It was no longer the stage for anarchic miracles, but a regular nightclub, forcing Tina to rely purely on her inherent vocal talent and stage presence to maintain its allure. Her dedication to her craft, much like a seasoned performer refusing to rest on past laurels, showed a parallel commitment to authenticity that resonated deeply with Stanley's new outlook. Their relationship was now built on shared vulnerability regarding their public and private selves, a far more robust foundation than the fleeting thrill of the impossible. Detective Kellaway, though officially closing the case on the Green Menace, which he likely explained away as a very elaborate series of elaborate stage hoaxes or perhaps mass hysteria, was forever changed. He had touched the edge of the inexplicable, and the rigidity of his worldview was slightly softened by the memory of things that defied logic. He remained the diligent officer, but perhaps with a slightly wider, more speculative glance toward the shadows. His dogged pursuit had, in a strange way, validated Stanley's ordeal, proving that even the unbelievable could be met with civic duty. The fate of the mask itself, resting somewhere in the river's current, served as a potent symbol of possibility relinquished. It was the ultimate muse locked away, suggesting that true creativity and self-expression, once found through extraordinary means, must ultimately be cultivated from within. The river took back the jade, allowing Stanley to keep only the resulting character development. This ending affirms the narrative's subtle commentary. The magic was merely the catalyst. The story was always about Stanley Ipkiss, finally learning how to fully inhabit his own life, unafraid to take the lead role in his own, unscripted, wonderfully human drama. Stanley's re-entry into the mundane world felt like a quiet actor stepping off a wildly successful, yet ultimately taxing, world tour. The vibrant, exaggerated colors of his mask-fueled adventures had faded, replaced by the muted tones of everyday reality. But he noticed those tones differently now. Where before he saw only gray, he now detected subtle shades of possibility. His steps were no longer tentative. They possessed the measured confidence of someone who knew, intimately, the sheer volume of noise he could generate if he chose to, yet preferred the quiet sincerity of his own voice. This newfound composure was the enduring script written by the chaos. Tina, navigating her own sense of reality, post-mask, treated Stanley with a delicate reverence, as if handling a rare, rediscovered artifact. She had been captivated by the mask's boundless energy, an energy that screamed, "Look at me!" But she was falling for the quiet man who now dared to look back. Her career, which demanded constant reinvention and performance, suddenly seemed hollow compared to the raw, unplanned authenticity Stanley had demonstrated in defeating Dorian. She sought depth, the genuine article, realizing that the spectacular was often just smoke and mirrors, whereas Stanley's inherent goodness was a constant, reliable light source. Their courtship moved at a pace reflecting their mutual caution, a slow, unfolding dance that respected the massive gulf they had both crossed to reach this point of shared normalcy. The unspoken understanding between them was that the green face had acted as a dramatic exposition device, revealing Stanley's true heart to both himself and Tina in one explosive week. Any lingering doubt Tina might have harbored about Stanley's capability or worth vanished when she saw him actively reject the supernatural shortcut to heroism, choosing instead the difficult path of facing a villain using only his wits and newfound conviction. That moment, when Stanley reclaimed agency, was more romantic than any elaborate, magical serenade the mask could have conjured. Detective Kellaway, having wrestled with a case file that would read like a surrealist fever dream, settled back into the familiar rhythms of precinct paperwork. Yet, the memory lingered like a strange odor in his office, a reminder that the city held secrets far stranger than petty larceny. His skepticism never entirely vanished, but it was tempered by a newfound, albeit grudging, respect for the unpredictable. He often found himself glancing at the river on his patrol routes, a silent acknowledgement of the power that had briefly warped the fabric of his jurisdiction, perhaps even hoping for just one more perfectly executed, inexplicable prank, simply for the story. The discarded mask in the water was more than just an object removed from circulation. It was the physical manifestation of a creative pressure valve released. Had Stanley kept it, the temptation to relapse into easy spectacle would have been overwhelming, stifling the slow, difficult growth he had achieved. The movie of Stanley Ipkiss was over, but the real-life drama, grounded in earned self-respect and mutual affection, was just beginning. It was the triumph of the sincere protagonist over the dazzling but ultimately hollow illusion, a resolution that satisfied the heart as much as it delighted the senses. Stanley's days now possessed a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. He navigated the bank lobby not as a ghost, shuffling between teller windows, but as a man inhabiting his own space, occasionally flashing a confident, almost mischievous smile, a subtle echo of the mask's exuberant grin that Tina found incredibly endearing. This internalized change was the key difference between mere imitation and genuine evolution. He hadn't learned to act confident. He had simply stopped being afraid to be himself. His interactions with his colleagues, previously characterized by awkward avoidance, became infused with a gentle, self-assured banter, suggesting he was finally comfortable enough to poke fun at the absurdity of office life without fearing repercussions. Tina, observing this metamorphosis, found herself continually charmed. The electricity generated by the mask had been intoxicating, yes, but it was inherently unsustainable, like trying to live perpetually on pure adrenaline. What drew her now was the genuine, unforced affection Stanley offered. She began sharing aspects of her own carefully guarded professional life with him, revealing the tireless work and occasional loneliness that lay beneath the sequined costumes and stage applause. Their bond solidified in shared confidences, a quiet understanding that they both understood the precarious nature of public perception versus private reality, a theme that resonates deeply with anyone living under a spotlight, whether literal or metaphorical. Kellaway's lingering uncertainty manifested in subtle ways. While he never reopened the file, the unsolved mysteries surrounding the Coco Bongo incidents gave him a quiet sense of existential restlessness. He often daydreamed, perhaps picturing the green figure performing some impossible feat, a secret he kept locked away because explaining it to his colleagues would invite ridicule. This experience had, ironically, made him a better, more perceptive detective, less inclined to dismiss anomalies outright, a testament to how encountering the utterly inexplicable can sometimes broaden the narrow confines of bureaucratic thinking. He learned that sometimes the truth is wilder than any plausible lie. Dorian Tyrrell, incarcerated after the spectacular climax, likely served as a cautionary tale within the prison system, a man whose excessive greed consumed him entirely. His ambition, which had been so thinly veiled, was now utterly exposed as base criminality. He understood power only in terms of forceful acquisition, never in terms of charisma or earned respect, ensuring his legacy would be one of failure, contrasting sharply with Stanley's unexpected success in the realm of human connection. The river, having reclaimed the ancient artifact, became an almost sacred location for Stanley, though he never returned to seek it out. It represented a powerful, chaotic muse that had served its purpose. It provided the necessary theatrical shock to break the stasis of his former life. The film concludes not with the promise of more magic, but with the quiet certainty of a man who has done the hardest work, the internal renovation, Stanley and Tina's future seemed grounded in shared laughter over absurd memories and the commitment to a life where the most extraordinary thing they achieved was building a real relationship, proving that the most compelling magic is often just the bravery to be authentically seen. The final image, after the jade has settled into the riverbed, is one of settled expectation, the quiet aftermath following a spectacular, genre-defying explosion. Stanley and Tina, now a couple navigating the tangible world outside the neon glow of the Coco Bongo, embody the classic romantic trope of the ordinary man elevated not by inheritance or destiny, but by sheer force of character revealed under duress. Their shared history, rich with impossible happenings, paradoxically anchors them to normalcy. They have a secret language built on inside jokes about giant hammers and talking dogs, a shared history of the sublime and the ridiculous that few couples could ever match. Tina's dedication to her singing career takes on a new sincerity. She no longer sings solely for the roar of the crowd or the validation of the spotlight, but perhaps, in quiet moments, for the man whose gentle encouragement now means more than any standing ovation. Her performance style likely matures, shedding some of the theatrical veneer that sought to mask insecurity, embracing instead the raw, emotive power Stanley first saw in her. She understands, perhaps better than anyone, that true artistry isn't about the flashiest trick, but the most honest delivery. Stanley, for his part, finds that the small victories of his daily life now carry the weight of epic confrontations. Dealing with a difficult loan application or managing a minor office dispute requires a fraction of the courage he summoned against Dorian Terrell, yet he approaches these tasks with the same focused energy. He hasn't become a superhero, but he has successfully integrated the best parts of his alter ego, the assertiveness, the readiness to defend the underdog, into his own persona. He is the ultimate example of method acting, where the role eventually swallows the actor whole, but in the most positive sense, shaping the authentic self. Kellaway's experience serves as a lingering, private joke in the city's law enforcement circles. He may never write a formal report detailing the green chaos, but every time he sees a particularly loud tie or hears an unexpectedly well-delivered quip, a shadow of recognition crosses his face. The world for Kellaway is now slightly less predictable, and this slight softening of rigid logic is perhaps the most profound, unintended consequence of the mask's visit. He represents the structure that, while attempting to contain the fantastic, is ultimately forced to acknowledge its momentary existence. The film closes, then, not on a magical spectacle, but on a shared, knowing glance between two people who have survived an existential roller coaster ride. It suggests that the true gift of the magical artifact wasn't the power it bestowed, but the permission it granted. Permission for a shy man to finally step into the light and discover that the applause for his true self, though quieter, resonates far longer than the loudest cartoonish fanfare. The adventure is over, and the lasting reward is the simple, difficult, and deeply human act of loving and being loved authentically. The narrative settles into a comfortable, yet keenly observed, domesticity for Stanley and Tina, a stark contrast to the fever dream energy that defined their initial encounters. Stanley's evolution is best seen in the quiet details. The way he organizes his desk with a new sense of proprietary care, or how he handles a misunderstanding with a customer without resorting to panicked apology. He carries the memory of the mask not as a burden, but as a deeply personal reference point, a mental safety net confirming that he has faced far greater absurdity and survived. This quiet confidence acts as an invisible armor, far more resilient than the temporary green disguise. Tina, witnessing this steady growth, fully commits to the reality of Stanley Ipkiss. Her life as a celebrated jazz singer often necessitated a performance of untouchable glamour. Now, she finds genuine joy in the unguarded moments, sharing simple meals, discussing mundane future plans, moments where the spotlight is entirely absent. Her artistic inspiration shifts. No longer is she simply the alluring siren on stage, but an artist channeling deeper, more complex emotions, perhaps even finding unexpected lyrical inspiration in the sheer improbability of her relationship with Stanley. She becomes the anchor, grounding the man who once needed supernatural flight to feel stable. Kellaway, in his own bureaucratic sphere, occasionally finds himself reviewing cold case files related to the bank heist, always hitting the same dead end. However, the experience has inadvertently sharpened his instincts against actual human deception. Where before he might have been blinded by the obvious, he now possesses a healthy suspicion of anything too neat or too loud. He learned that the most effective criminals, even the purely chaotic ones, must eventually interact with the rules of the physical world, a lesson that serves him well against the more conventional crooks he deals with daily. His memory of the mask remains his silent burden, the one story he knows is absolutely true, but utterly unshareable, a testament to the limits of empirical evidence. The absence of the mask itself leaves a palpable void of untapped potential, yet this absence is crucial for the story's thematic closure. If the mask were to reappear, Stanley would be faced with the ultimate test, choosing practiced illusion over earned reality. By returning the artifact to the river, the filmmakers underscore the theme that true character development cannot be outsourced or temporarily borrowed. It must be forged internally. Stanley's victory is not defeating Dorian, but successfully walking away from the easy, seductive power the mask represented. The film ultimately suggests that the most remarkable special effect is the transformation of a timid heart into a brave one, a spectacle far harder to choreograph than any cartoon physics. The quiet victory Stanley achieved was not the silencing of chaos, but the mastery of his own response to it. He had looked into the face of pure, unbridled ID and found a strange mirror reflecting the untapped potential he possessed all along. His life now carried the subtle, satisfying weight of a deeply satisfying performance that had gone exactly as planned, even though the script was entirely improvised. The sheer audacity of the mask, its willingness to defy every expectation, had subtly rewritten Stanley's own internal monologue, allowing for moments of spontaneous wit that felt entirely organic rather than manufactured. Tina, increasingly comfortable in the authenticity Stanley offered, began to recognize the subtle parallels between her life and his newfound confidence. Both had been performers, one under bright lights, the other hiding in the shadows. Yet both required an immense leap of faith to expose their true selves to the world. Her burgeoning commitment to Stanley was a conscious choice, rejecting the shallow magnetism of the mask for the profound, nuanced attraction to the man who risked everything for decency. She often found herself reflecting on how her own dazzling stage persona sometimes felt like a green mask, and Stanley was the only one who seemed eager to peel it back gently. Kellaway, forever the procedural man, settled into a comfortable skepticism regarding the supernatural, preferring the concrete evidence of bureaucracy. However, he occasionally caught himself smiling wryly when reading reports detailing bizarre coincidences, a car oddly parked, an inexplicable sound, as if acknowledging a secret language shared only between him and the phantom energy that briefly haunted his precinct. His commitment to the law remained absolute, but the edges of his worldview had been irrevocably softened by the inexplicable visitation of pure, joyful anarchy. He represented the societal force that, while attempting to police reality, had been forced to admit that reality sometimes stretches far beyond its jurisdiction. The lingering presence of the mask, even submerged, serves as a perpetual narrative anchor to the theme of choice. It was the ultimate Faustian bargain simplified, instant access to everything versus the slow, arduous cultivation of self-worth. Stanley chose the latter, understanding that the power offered by the artifact was parasitic. It demanded an exchange of identity. By relinquishing it, he claimed ownership over his own personality, a far more valuable and lasting form of control. The final resonance of the film lies in this affirmation. The green euphoria was fleeting, but the genuine courage found in overcoming profound shyness and fear is a permanent acquisition, the true and enduring special effect of a life well lived. The quiet satisfaction Stanley experienced was the mark of a man who had successfully navigated a high-wire act without a net, realizing the net was unnecessary all along. His life, now comfortably settled into a manageable pace, retained a certain effervescence, a residual energy that manifested not as manic antics, but as an unshakable poise. This poise allowed him to appreciate the small victories, the successful negotiation of a raise, the ability to look his landlord in the eye without stammering, as true achievements, earned through character rather than borrowed through magic. He had graduated from being a supporting character in his own story to the undisputed lead, a transition often sought but rarely achieved by those wrestling with deep-seated insecurity. Tina, fully integrated into Stanley's genuine world, found a profound stability that complemented her own dynamic career. She recognized that the raw, creative explosion embodied by the mask was ultimately a means to an end, a destructive tool for an inhibited man. Her enduring affection was reserved for the blueprint revealed by that explosion. She began integrating that sense of playful daring, learned by observing the mask, into her own performances, ensuring her act remained fresh and unpredictable, but now tethered to an emotional truth only Stanley seemed capable of drawing out of her. Their shared life became a nuanced tapestry, woven from sequins and sensible sweaters, a beautiful contradiction. Kellaway, meanwhile, carried the memory of the case not as a professional failure, but as a private, esoteric education. He occasionally spoke to his younger, greener colleagues about the importance of keeping an open mind, framing it as general advice about unpredictable human nature, never betraying the true, fantastical source of his wisdom. He embodied the steadfast nature of the established order, momentarily forced to bend before the inexplicable. His continued dedication to routine was a deliberate act of grounding himself after brushing against the absolute edge of reality, finding comfort in the measurable and the provable. The ultimate symbolism of the returned mask lies in its relinquishing of narrative control. It represented the ultimate shortcut, the temptation to bypass the messy, vulnerable process of self-improvement. By choosing the mundane reality with Tina over the supernatural high of the green persona, Stanley affirmed a belief system where internal growth outweighs external spectacle. The film ultimately champions the quiet, sustained effort of becoming a better human being over the instant gratification of borrowed chaotic power. The magic was just a high-concept trailer for the much richer, albeit slower-paced feature film of Stanley's actual life. The quiet equilibrium Stanley achieved was the hardest-won victory of all, surpassing the spectacle of any cartoonish confrontation. He understood that the mask was a powerful, but ultimately superficial mimic, capable of replicating excitement, but incapable of generating genuine human depth. Stanley's subsequent actions, his steady commitment to Tina, his newfound professional dignity, were the true, painstaking acts of creation. He was no longer waiting for a prop to define him. He was writing his own material, dialogue that resonated not with exaggerated whoops and hollers, but with sincerity. This internal scripting was the real magic. Tina's artistic trajectory mirrored this newfound sincerity. She maintained her brilliance, of course, for a star of her magnitude cannot simply fade, but the core of her performance shifted. The calculated allure softened, replaced by an undeniable emotional honesty that captivated audiences on a deeper level. She was performing from a place of secure happiness, a state only achievable after weathering extraordinary emotional storms. When she looked at Stanley across a crowded room, the shared history of green mayhem provided an instant, unspoken understanding that transcended ordinary couples' communication. They had literally seen the worst and best of each other, one guise at a time. Kellaway's perspective became a quiet study in pragmatic acceptance. He never sought to rationalize the supernatural events with tidy police reports. Instead, he categorized them in his mind as unsolved anomalies of the metropolis, a category he visited rarely, usually when feeling too confined by paperwork. His skepticism remained, an essential trait for a good detective, but it was now cushioned by the knowledge that the universe held variables beyond departmental procedure. He occasionally found himself appreciating the sheer theatricality of the whole affair, recognizing the masterful staging, even if the actors were operating under impossible rules. The very idea of the mask lying dormant in the river was comforting. It was an untamed, raw potential that, in the hands of the greedy like Dorian, became monstrous, but in the hands of the inherently kind but inhibited, served as a necessary, albeit temporary, liberator. Stanley's final choice was to embrace the slow, often frustrating work of character building over the instantaneous, exhilarating corruption of borrowed power. The film ends not just with a couple united, but with a clear moral victory. The most thrilling special effect is the human spirit overcoming its self-imposed limitations, transforming an anonymous life into one rich with earned significance. The lingering atmosphere surrounding Stanley and Tina was one of cherished, earned tranquility. Their relationship existed in the delicate space between the extraordinary memory and the beautiful ordinariness of their present. Stanley often found himself observing Tina while she slept, marveling at the unmasked perfection of her repose, a scene utterly devoid of flashing lights or the threat of imminent destruction. This quiet observation was more potent than any grand gesture the mask ever performed. It was the intimate witnessing of a bond built on mutual recognition of vulnerability. He still occasionally caught himself anticipating a cartoonish escape route in a minor inconvenience, a momentarily jammed door, perhaps. But the impulse dissolved instantly, replaced by the pragmatic, resourceful thinking he had slowly cultivated. Tina, in turn, approached Stanley's residual shyness with profound patience, understanding it as the scar tissue of a long-suppressed self. Where she once craved the manic energy of the green chaos, she now valued the deep, resonant hum of Stanley's genuine presence. She often tested his quiet confidence with small, unexpected inquiries about their future, moving in together, long-term plans, and was met not with panicked stammering, but with thoughtful, measured responses. These grounded conversations were the true love songs, far more enduring than the impromptu jazz numbers performed under magical duress. She had seen the ultimate expression of unrestrained ID, and she chose the responsible, loving adult, realizing that true passion lies not in volatility, but in unwavering reliability. Detective Kellaway, having faced the utter breakdown of the logical world, developed an almost philosophical detachment regarding minor crimes. He was less interested in catching the small-time pickpocket than in understanding the underlying human desperation. His experience with the mask had introduced a sliver of mysticism into his otherwise rigid worldview, an invisible footnote to every police report. Assume nothing is impossible. He would sometimes catch himself wondering if the jade artifact was truly gone, or if it simply waited in the murky currents for another soul desperate enough to embrace transformative absurdity. This internal debate kept his mind sharp, perpetually questioning the surface appearance of reality. The legacy of the mask, therefore, was not its magic, but its function as a crucible. It burned away Stanley's fear, leaving behind a purified core of self-acceptance. The film's enduring message rests on the notion that external magic is a poor substitute for internal courage. Stanley did not need to become a trickster god to win the girl. He only needed the terrifying, liberating permission granted by that god to finally show the girl who he truly was. The absence of green paint confirmed that the real spectacle was always the slow, arduous, and ultimately more satisfying process of becoming one's authentic self. The vibrant, almost cartoonish energy of the mask, released in 1994, serves as a fascinating cultural artifact, perfectly capturing the nascent digital age optimism mixed with a classic screwball comedy framework. This film is more than just a showcase for Jim Carrey's exploding talent. It is a complex exploration of ID unleashed, repressed desire, and the seductive nature of artificial persona. Carrey, at this point in his career, was transitioning from his breakout success on In Living Color to cinematic superstardom, a transition that required a vehicle capable of handling his singular, elastic physicality. The mask provided that vehicle, drawing heavily on the aesthetic DNA of 1940s Warner Brothers. Animation. Think Tex Avery and Looney Tunes, and merging it seamlessly with cutting-edge CGI, which, while dated by today's standards, felt revolutionary then. The film's success hinges entirely on the duality. Stanley Ipkiss, the meek, timid, and utterly unremarkable bank clerk, and the mask, the charismatic, unpredictable trickster, imbued with the spirit of Loki, the Norse god of mischief. The transformation sequence itself is key. Stanley Ipkiss is defined by his inhibitions, his crush on Tina Carlisle, his fear of his landlady, his inadequacy in his professional life. The green mask acts as a psychological release valve, an externalization of every ID-driven impulse Stanley represses. This isn't merely a costume change, it's a psychological metamorphosis that allows the actor to fully deploy the manic, physicality-driven comedy he had perfected on television. Carrey's commitment to the performance, weaving in everything from musical theater routines to impressions, elevates the material far beyond standard effects comedy. Contrast this with Cameron Diaz's portrayal of Tina Carlisle. Diaz, in her feature film debut, embodies the classic film noir femme fatale, albeit one softened for a mainstream audience. Her performance owes much to the sultry, world-weary allure of 1940s screen sirens, yet she possesses a genuine warmth that prevents her from becoming a mere plot device. Her attraction to the mask is fascinating. She is drawn not to Stanley's insecurity, but to the unfiltered confidence and danger the persona represents. This speaks to a core theme, the appeal of the extraordinary when confronted with the mundane. The narrative structure is deceptively simple, mirroring the classic hero's journey but inverted. Stanley doesn't seek adventure. Adventure, or rather chaos, finds him via the artifact. The subplot involving the menacing gangster Dorian Tyrell, played with appropriately oily menace by Peter Green, provides the necessary dramatic stakes. Tyrell's clumsy attempts to utilize the mask's power highlight the film's central irony. The mask grants infinite power, but only to those who understand its inherent nature, joyful chaotic anarchy. Tyrell tries to weaponize it. Ipkiss primarily uses it for self-actualization and romantic pursuit. The film's visual language is inseparable from its success. Director Chuck Russell masterfully orchestrates the shift in visual tone whenever the mask is donned. The world around the mask bends to its logic. Objects defy physics, backgrounds become vibrant, hand-drawn sets, and sound effects mimic classic cartoon noises. This commitment to hyperreality grounds the film in a specific, nostalgic aesthetic, tapping into universal memories of animated violence and impossible escapes. Ultimately, The Mask operates as a sophisticated parable about the performance of identity. It posits that the greatest power lies not in the magic object itself, but in the self-acceptance required to shed one's carefully constructed inhibitions. Stanley Ipkiss only wins Tina's affection and defeats his enemies when he realizes he doesn't need the mask to be bold. He just needed the temporary permission it offered to discover the boldness already present within him. The mask is a catalyst, but the true star is Carrey's incredible capacity to make the surreal feel emotionally resonant, cementing the film's status as a defining piece of 90s blockbuster entertainment. The very fabric of the film pulsates with a kinetic energy that perfectly mirrored the zeitgeist of the mid-90s, a period eager to embrace spectacle over subtlety. Carrey's performance wasn't merely acting, it was a sustained physical declaration, an evolution from the structured sketches of television into full-blown, three-dimensional cartooning. One can trace the lineage of his physical comedy back through silent film masters, but filtered through the frenetic, high-octane style of a comedian who understood that vulnerability was the bedrock upon which true absurdity must be built. Stanley Ipkiss is inherently vulnerable. He is the ultimate nice guy, the kind of man who apologizes when someone bumps into him. This inherent sweetness makes his regression into anarchic glee all the more potent. The relationship between Ipkiss and the mask functions as a classic dramatic foil, but one given a vibrant, hyper-saturated color palette. While Stanley is muted in his drab suits and hesitant posture, the mask bursts forth in shades of blinding green and an unnerving, impossibly white grin. It's a visual manifestation of wish fulfillment taken to its most excessive extreme. The brilliance lies in how the film forces us to confront which persona we, the audience, truly prefer. Are we drawn to the safety of mediocrity or the intoxicating danger of unbound expression? Tina Carlyle's attraction is the barometer for this question. She is initially captivated by the mask's sheer audacity, the way he commands the room without apology, something Stanley could never manage. Yet the film subtly suggests that for a lasting connection, the raw power must eventually merge with the genuine heart, the underlying goodness that Stanley, despite his timidity, actually possesses. Dorian Tyrell, the antagonist, serves as the cautionary tale regarding the misuse of the mask's power. He embodies the brute force application of chaos. Where the mask uses his gifts for elaborate gags, smooth talking, and light-hearted mayhem, turning a gun into a squeaky toy or a saxophone, Tyrell attempts to use it for conventional crime. He fails because he lacks the requisite irreverence. He wants power for material gain and dominance, motivations too pedestrian for the artifact. The mask demands performance and a willingness to embrace the ridiculous. Tyrell only offers malice, which the magic rightly rejects or twists into humiliation. Furthermore, the characterization of Ipkiss's landlady, Mrs. Penalty, played by Kathy Kinney, provides the grounded, low-stakes, comedic antagonism that fuels Stanley's daily misery. Her constant nagging and physical threats against his beloved dog, Milo, establish the domestic prison from which Stanley desperately seeks escape. Milo, incidentally, is an unsung hero of the film, a genuinely talented canine actor whose own transformations and loyalty underscore the themes of unconditional acceptance that Stanley craves. Milo accepts Stanley, and eventually, he accepts the mask, highlighting that the core personality underneath the green surface is fundamentally trustworthy. The set design, particularly when the mask is active, eschews realism entirely, opting for painted backdrops and exaggerated perspective shots reminiscent of old Hollywood stage productions. This aesthetic choice, far from being a limitation of the early 90s special effects budget, becomes a defining strength. It frames the entire affair as a conscious dream or hallucination. We are not meant to believe it is real. We are meant to revel in its impossibility. It's a self-aware piece of maximalist cinema, celebrating the artifice of movie-making itself, perfectly positioning Jim Carrey as the ultimate master of ceremonies in this carnival of manufactured reality. The sheer commitment to the visual hyperbole in The Mask is what elevates it beyond simple popcorn fare. It's an immersion into a specific kind of escapist fantasy, fueled by the decade's burgeoning interest in the digital avatar. Carrey wasn't just acting in front of a green screen. He was embodying the very concept of unrestricted data potential, a human program running an impossible operating system. His physical fluidity suggests a being unbound by the limitations of flesh and bone, capable of stretching time and space with a mere snap of his fingers or a perfectly timed double-take. This physicality creates a deep empathy for Stanley's frustration. The audience feels the genuine ache of being trapped inside an unexciting body when they witness the freedom of the persona. Tina Carlyle's arc, while secondary, is crucial for anchoring the story's emotional truth. Her allure to the mask is initially predicated on excitement, the adrenaline rush that Stanley can never provide. However, the film intelligently allows her to see past the veneer. Her growing affection for Stanley isn't pity. It stems from recognizing the fragile, earnest soul beneath the green facade. When Stanley finally faces Dorian Tyrell without the mask's aid, relying only on his own quick thinking and courage born from experience, it is Tina's nonverbal affirmation that validates his true victory. This suggests that the lesson learned isn't to be the mask forever, but to integrate the confidence the mask revealed into the real self. Diaz plays Tina with an inherent skepticism toward obvious displays of power, which makes her eventual acceptance of Stanley, the real Stanley, a more meaningful triumph of character over spectacle. The film's soundtrack and sound design are equally instrumental in this theatrical immersion. The use of big band jazz and swing music during the mask sequences isn't just background noise, it's part of his characterization. He is a throwback, a magical anachronism existing within a modern, somewhat cynical 1994 cityscape. When the mask dances or sings, the music swells with an old-world melodrama, contrasting sharply with the modern banality that surrounds Stanley Ipkiss. This juxtaposition emphasizes the escape velocity required for Stanley to break free from his anxieties. The ultimate emotional payoff resides in the final confrontation, where Stanley deliberately provokes the mask's removal, demonstrating self-mastery. He has learned to harness the idea of the mask's confidence without needing the physical artifact. This self-actualization is what allows him to secure his job promotion and, more importantly, Tina's genuine admiration. The film subtly critiques reliance on external aids for self-worth, suggesting that while The Mask is fun and spectacularly entertaining to watch, true heroism, even in a cartoonish context, requires internal conviction. The lingering image is not of the emerald-skinned trickster, but of Stanley Ipkiss finally standing tall, carrying the lessons of chaos into the realm of genuine human connection. The lasting resonance of the mask also resides in its subtle commentary on consumerism and the commodification of personality, a theme surprisingly potent for a high-budget special effects comedy. The mask itself functions as the ultimate consumer product, instantaneous gratification wrapped in packaging that promises a complete life overhaul. Stanley Ipkiss buys into this promise wholesale, believing the external transformation will solve his internal malaise. This taps into a broader cultural anxiety prevalent in the 90s regarding superficial identity management, the pressure to look, act, and feel a certain way, often achieved through manufactured means, be they fashion, technology, or in this case, ancient magic. The artifacts surrounding the mask further enrich this theme. The discovery of the mask in the pawn shop, a repository for forgotten or discarded histories, positions it as a potentially dangerous piece of outdated technology. When Dorian Tyrell attempts to use the mask to rob the bank, he is engaging in the most conventional, capitalist expression of desire. Greed materialized. His failure to harness the true spirit of chaos highlights the film's subversive message. Genuine fulfillment doesn't come from acquiring wealth or power through brute force, but from internal, self-directed play. The mask is not interested in petty theft, it's interested in spectacle and existential mischief. Furthermore, the film's production design smartly utilizes color theory to reinforce these psychological states. Stanley's world is bathed in muted blues, grays, and browns, representing stagnation and repression. When the mask appears, the saturation levels skyrocket, pushing the visual field into unnatural, vibrant greens and scorching yellows, the colors of raw, unfiltered ego. This is cinematic shorthand for the overwhelming psychic shift. Even the presence of Tina Carlisle injects warmth and primary colors into Stanley's bleak environment, suggesting that human connection itself carries a powerful, if less overtly magical, transformative quality. The film argues, perhaps unconsciously, that while the mask offers a tempting shortcut, real intimacy requires stepping out of the protective, albeit exhilarating, confines of the artificial persona and exposing the flawed, authentic self. The final merging of Stanley's newfound confidence with his inherent goodness is the film's true, hard-won magic trick, proving that the best special effect is genuine character growth. The film's enduring appeal is deeply rooted in its masterful handling of tonal oscillation, a tightrope walk between slapstick absurdity and genuine emotional stakes that few comedies of that era managed to sustain. Chuck Russell, the director, clearly understood that for the outlandish antics of the mask to land with impact, the audience must first deeply invest in the plight of Stanley Ipkiss. This investment is meticulously cultivated through establishing Stanley's profound sense of social paralysis. We see him routinely overlooked by his colleagues, tormented by his aggressive landlady, and unable to muster the courage to even initiate a simple conversation with Tina, the object of his affection. This consistent depiction of abject failure makes the subsequent explosion of power not just funny, but cathartic for the viewer who has ever felt unseen or insignificant. The emotional language of the film relies heavily on Carrey's ability to convey complex internal conflict through externalized exaggeration. When Stanley first finds the mask, there is a profound hesitancy, a momentary fearful glance back at his meek self before he commits to the transformation. This suggests an understanding, even on a subconscious level, that this newfound persona is borrowed, a temporary loan against his own inhibitions. The mask's behavior, while gleefully destructive to property and social norms, is surprisingly benevolent towards actual people, reinforcing the idea that his violence is performative rather than malicious. He is a trickster spirit, not a villain in the mold of Tyrell. He delights in humiliating the powerful, like his aggressive boss, Mr. Dawkins, and charming the unattainable, acting out a highly stylized version of what an ordinary man wishes he could do without consequence. Furthermore, the dynamic between Stanley and Milo deserves deeper examination as a thematic anchor. Milo, the scrappy terrier, acts as Stanley's only true confidant and emotional sounding board. Milo's sheer, unadulterated excitement when Stanley returns as the Mask contrasts with his cautious affection for the mild-mannered Stanley. This canine perspective implies that Milo senses the true, underlying spirit, the good spirit, is present regardless of the green skin. This loyalty contrasts sharply with the fickle admiration Tina initially shows the Mask. By the end, Tina's acceptance mirrors Milo's. She learns to appreciate the inherent worth of Stanley, not just the dazzling power he can temporarily summon. The sequence where Stanley, without the Mask, uses his wits to save Milo from Tyrell's clutches is the narrative climax of self-discovery, a moment where manufactured power yields to genuine, earned bravery, finally satisfying the emotional requirements the film has built. The success of The Mask is also inextricably linked to its innovative use of practical effects, blended seamlessly with the then emerging digital wizardry, creating a tactile, yet impossible, cinematic reality. Unlike contemporary blockbusters, where CGI often dominates, here the technology serves the comedy, mimicking the rubber hose elasticity and rapid-fire visual gags of classic animation. The seamless morphing sequences, where Carrey's face stretches, contorts, and snaps back into place, required a marriage of elaborate prosthetic makeup and early digital compositing that felt groundbreaking. This commitment to visual absurdity grounded the film in a nostalgic framework, while simultaneously pushing technical boundaries, allowing the audience to suspend disbelief not just because the plot allowed it, but because the visuals demanded such surrender. The cultural saturation of Jim Carrey's physical vocabulary during this period cannot be overstated. He arrived on the cinematic stage not as a fully formed actor, but as a force of nature who seemed to be physically fighting against the limitations of his own anatomy. His background, honed through years in live stand-up, and the high-pressure environment of sketch comedy, required instantaneous improvisation and adaptation. When playing the Mask, he is executing physical comedy at its zenith, utilizing every muscle fiber to communicate manic glee, fear, or seduction. This high-wire act prevents the character from becoming a mere animated creation. Carrey injects a manic, almost desperate humanity into the green chaos, suggesting that the Mask is merely the most expressive outlet for the energy Stanley Ipkiss had been suppressing for decades. Consider the sequence where the Mask attempts to woo Tina Carlisle at the Coco Bongo Club. This entire set piece functions as a grand audition for the audience. The Mask doesn't just sing. He becomes an amalgamation of musical idols, bending his body into impossible shapes while maintaining eye contact that is both predatory and undeniably charming. This calculated spectacle is designed to overwhelm Tina, mirroring how Ipkiss hopes to overwhelm his own anxieties. Yet the emotional core remains fragile. The music swells, the crowd roars, but the magic is only potent because Stanley, the unseen human element, is desperately hoping it works. It is a performance about performance, where the ultimate goal is not the dance itself, but the genuine human acceptance that follows the dazzling display. This focus on external validation versus internal fortitude forms the enduring thematic argument. Dorian Tyrell and Stanley Ipkiss both seek the Mask for power, but their methodologies reveal their moral standings. Tyrell treats the artifact as a tool for dominance, expecting immediate, quantifiable results: money, control, elimination of rivals. The mask, however, operates on whim and artistry. It is a rebellion against structure. When Stanley finally discards the mask and successfully outwits Tyrell using quick thinking, utilizing the environment, and relying on the courage he briefly borrowed, the film declares its thesis. The true power was not inherited from an artifact, but learned through the temporary, irresponsible application of boundless confidence. The confidence becomes internalized, transforming Stanley from a passive victim into an active participant in his own narrative, concluding the transformative journey with a sense of earned, quiet victory far more satisfying than the preceding green-skinned theatrics. The persistent undercurrent of nostalgia woven throughout the mask speaks volumes about the cultural climate of the early 90s, a decade often characterized by a yearning for simpler, more overtly expressive eras, even as digital technology surged forward. The film's aesthetic choices, the overtly stylized sets, the cartoon sound effects dubbed over realistic footage, and the swing music soundtrack are not accidental embellishments. They function as a deliberate distancing mechanism from gritty reality. This deliberate artifice is crucial because it provides the necessary fictional space for Stanley Ipkiss to shed his real-world limitations without facing truly devastating, permanent consequences. The world of the mask operates under cartoon physics, allowing for slapstick violence and impossible acrobatics, which inherently lowers the stakes of failure and raises the potential for comedic success. The film expertly contrasts the rigid structure of Ipkiss's life with the fluid anarchy of the persona. His job at Edge City Savings and Loan is depicted with oppressive beige tones and bureaucratic tedium, a visual manifestation of societal expectation and stagnation. When the mask appears, the visual palette erupts, asserting that true life and color exist only in the realm of unbridled self-expression. This stark visual dichotomy reinforces the central conflict: the battle between the self we are pressured to be and the self we secretly desire to unleash. This resonates profoundly with an audience grappling with their own emerging digital identities, where online profiles often represented aspirational, curated versions of their offline selves. Furthermore, the character of Charlie Schumacher, Ipkiss's cautious and conventional colleague, serves as the necessary foil for both Stanley and the mask. Charlie represents the fear of stepping out of line, the voice of social moderation that keeps Stanley paralyzed. He is the embodiment of what Stanley should be doing, making the mask's actions, such as insulting the boss or seducing the femme fatale, all the more shocking and liberating. Charlie's reaction shots often mirror the audience's initial disbelief, providing a relatable human anchor amidst the supernatural chaos. When the mask interacts with Charlie, the trickster persona often targets Charlie's rigidity, highlighting how deeply conformity stifles joy. The film's handling of romance is particularly insightful regarding this dichotomy. Tina Carlisle is initially drawn to the spectacle because it is the only thing that truly sees her, or rather, the only thing that can match her own suppressed desire for excitement. However, the narrative correctly concludes that a relationship built solely on the borrowed charisma of a magical entity is unsustainable. The true romantic victory is when Stanley, stripped of the green disguise, demonstrates the courage forged in his experiences as the mask. He uses the lessons of improvisation and boldness, not the actual magic, to secure Tina. This suggests a mature reading of escapism. It is a necessary, temporary vacation from reality that should ultimately equip the individual with the tools to improve their reality, rather than an ongoing alternative to it. The mask, therefore, is revealed to be a psychological training simulator for self-assertion. The thematic core of the mask pivots around the essential difference between performance for external validation and authentic self-expression, a distinction perfectly encapsulated by the mask's power to both create and reveal. The mythology surrounding the mask, explicitly linking it to Loki, is vital because Loki is not merely a god of evil, but a shapeshifter, an agent of necessary chaos whose actions often serve to disrupt stagnant orders and force change upon the rigid structures of Asgard. This narrative justification allows the film to explore anarchic comedy without descending into pure nihilism. The mask's actions are disruptive, yet ultimately beneficial to Stanley's stagnant life. He clears the path for self-improvement by demolishing social barriers. This concept of necessary disruption is vividly demonstrated in the consequences faced by those who misunderstand the mask's purpose. Dorian Tyrell's simplistic, brute force approach to using the artifact, trying to force bank robbery through intimidation, is consistently thwarted by the mask's inherent love for the elaborate and the absurd. When Tyrell tries to execute a straightforward threat, the mask twists the weapon into a flower or a flag, humiliating the criminal intent. This highlights a crucial authorial stance. True power in this universe belongs not to the domineering, but to the playful intellect willing to embrace inherent ridiculousness. Tyrell lacks the joie de vivre required to wield such magic effectively. He wants control, while the mask offers only freedom, a philosophical rift that seals his doom. Jim Carrey's early career trajectory, moving from the structured, rapid-fire sketch environment of In Living Color to this feature film, provided him with the unique ability to inhabit these drastically different versions of the same character instantaneously. His training in physical mimicry and voice modulation allowed him to inhabit Stanley's shy, nasal cadence and then pivot mid-sentence to the mask's deep, exaggerated drawl and elastic facial geometry. This transition isn't just costume work. It's a deep dive into embodying the idea. Stanley is perpetually afraid of being seen. The mask actively demands to be seen, almost painfully so. This dynamic fuels the film's tension. The audience is constantly aware that the green alter ego is borrowing energy and confidence that the human self desperately needs to cultivate internally. The characterization of the film's environment, Edge City, further emphasizes this theme of hidden potential. The city itself feels like a dull canvas, waiting for the vibrant paint of imagination. When the mask operates, the backdrop often shifts to look hand-painted or excessively vibrant, suggesting that the reality Stanley inhabits is merely a consensus reality.